We live? I think we're live. I should really check. Yes, I'm on the right Wi-Fi. Ugh, thank God. Okay. Welcome, all. It's me again. And I am reviewing my set from yesterday. I was asked to perform kind of last minute at this space downtown in LA. Let me just turn down my volume on my mic real quick. Yeah, so I was asked to DJ, and so I brought all my shit. Not all of it. I didn't bring my compressor, the heat. I just brought OP1, Octatrack, NTS, Fader Fox, and that was pretty much it. And I plugged into a 4-channel mixer and just kind of got set up that way. Didn't touch the mixer the whole set. I could have, and honestly, it could have been kind of fun. I just never even thought about it. That might honestly, if I had more of a place to practice, then I might get used to using a mixer, but as it stands, I'm not really banking on that, so I didn't mess with it. But what I did do, like the day before, was just set up 11 patterns. Hello, Moshe and Misha, both of y'all, welcome. I'm just sort of going over this set today that I played last night in LA, and it was the first time I got to perform after quarantine, which was really fun. I just got asked last minute because a friend of mine that I met online had an art show and he was going to DJ, but then he realized he didn't have the bandwidth to do both. So I got, he gave me a call and was like, do you want to do this? Because I had just posted about making ambient music and wanting to play it live. And he was like, yeah, you should come. You should play some ambient stuff. So I brought, essentially I set up very simple 11 patterns. And what I did was I set them up so that each one had its own rhythm. I had 2 flex machines set up so that I could loop things in real time. And then I also had a static machine with a bunch of pre-recorded loops that I basically recorded this past year through all of my streams. So I kind of just went through all of those and was like, what loop would work with this rhythm? What loop would work with this rhythm? And I set up 11. I kind of figured I could jam through those in about, I had an hour and a half total to work on it. EasyBot, welcome. Just talking about my live set last night, or yesterday afternoon, kind of late afternoon, and outside. So I kind of came prepared with a bit of a chill ambient set, and what ended up happening was there were some pretty big PAs. It wasn't a huge space, it was kind of more just like an alleyway. But they kept coming up to me and being like, it's a little too quiet, we can't really hear it over here. So the louder it got, the harder it was for me to make ambient music, honestly. It was weird. It was like I was trying to keep it basic and just tone-based, but it just felt weird to be playing ambient music so loud. So I eventually just started adding rhythms, and the pace became a little faster. And all in all, I ended up going through these 11 patterns twice because I was just like, well, I'm going through them way faster, and I feel like when I'm at home, I'm able to I'm able to slow down a little bit more, and I wasn't really able to do that, which wasn't necessarily a bad thing. It was just like, I think my quarantine mind was just much more slow-paced. My personal pace was much slower than I think what I felt I was being invited to do. So I ended up, it wasn't a big deal. I think if I would have changed things, I might have given myself a little bit more of that vibe, because what I ended up with was things like this, that sound a bit more these were what I had prepared beforehand. I can show you some of these rhythms. And it was also at 84 BPM pretty much the whole time, but this time around I ended up speeding it up to like around 92. And then I had my OP1 for like But one thing I'm really glad that I did actually, which I'll share with y'all, is the day of, I want to say like the morning of the set, I had this desire to add more. I was like, what if I don't know what I want to add? So I ended up saving a bunch of recordings that I made the day of. I just went through all these patterns with my bass station actually and recorded extra loops. And each one was P-locked. So I basically set it up so that the default was the record buffer on tracks 1 and 2, but that in track 2 I had hidden away a P-lock to a loop that was designed for that particular setup. So when I listen to this, for example, let me just open the filter there. I was listening to this and I ended up creating a loop that sounds like this. And I sort of focused on bass lines in that regard. Because, I mean, bass station, it was kind of easy. And also most of the loops that I had normally put in track 3 just naturally were melodic or chord information, not as much low end. So track 2 ended up being kind of like this place where I could put a hidden loop that would also work with that particular pattern. So how did I hide it? I basically set it up as a fill. And this came from last Friday when I was messing around with fills a little bit with breakbeat stuff. And I was like, oh shit, if I set my loop to on and I record 4-bar loops, welcome Concrete Master Zero. If I record loops and I set them as fills, then I can record my loops, I can record new loops over in the record buffer. So I could be like when I press play, for example, this will not play. It's set to fill so that only when I turn on fill will it trigger that. And so I found a way to basically play 2 loops in the same track. The only caveat being that I can't really use the sequencer section of the track for anything except triggering that, unless I go in here and sort of mess with it. But essentially what I'm doing is I could play something like this, and knowing also that bass line is in my mind. So that should be recorded in, and the way that I would trigger that is I would set this to 64 so that I could just hit play here. If you hold down a track and press play, it'll start playing based on when you quantize the cue play in the second page of the record settings. So this way, I had a way to play a loop on this track, and since I set it to loop on, it would loop indefinitely. When I move to another pattern, it stays, right? Because I don't have anything actually triggering. This trigger is set to only fill. So when I do want to trigger it, I turn on fill. And that way I can move from one pattern to the next without interrupting the record buffers that I may have placed in there. And once I'm ready to actually transition to the next track, I can turn on the fill and trigger that. It's not a perfect system, and in fact, when I was playing yesterday, I got them confused, and I was like, why isn't it playing the thing I recorded when I press track 2 and play? Because I didn't realize I was triggering the record buffer, not the, the pre-designed, the p-locked file. I don't know if anyone's following, but I guess I should go over a little bit of how I was performing in the first place, because I think I'm working off of a certain amount of knowledge that I have accumulated for this particular project that is not necessarily universal. So, just quick overview. Let's go from track 6 to track 1. Well, let's go from track 8 to track 1. Track 8 I'm not really using. Track 7 is my through machine for this stuff. Track 6 is my kick, which is being controlled by the fader Fox, along with all the other stuff. I have tracks 1 through 6 here, low pass, high pass, release of the sample. I set my hold to 0 so that my release is controlling the length of the playback. And I just copy that from tracks 1 through 6 for ease of use. Track 5 is kind of like a field recording file, which, because I was doing ambient, presumably, I was having some longer files playing in this section. And let's see if I can actually get it to sound. It's frogs that I recorded on a trip to Sequoia. Track 4 is my big rhythm section. It's like my top rhythms. So I can filter that out. Okay, so track 3 is where I would put most of my melodic ideas. And let me see if this is playing. Yeah, so pretty simple. Just this like kind of cascading melody. So tracks 2 and 1 I kept open for the most part, so that I could use them to record new loops as I was playing. This was kind of where the improvisation aspect would play a role. But as I was describing before, I was also hiding loops that I created the day of the performance, like maybe the morning of the performance, I should say. So in track 2, I had these samples that I had recorded on the bass station that I knew would work with track 3. And essentially each pattern contained a new rhythm, a new melody slash chord progression in track 3, or some kind of melodic loop, and a hidden bass line in track 2. It wasn't always a bass line, but I think in the future I would like it to be, because then it just keeps me from having to think about what it is. But essentially, I had this bass line going. And the only way that I could actually play it was by turning the fill function on. So that way I could keep using tracks 1 and 2 as record buffers, but when I wanted a new bass line, or when I wanted the bass line that corresponded with this particular pattern, I could do that, and then on the next go around, the bass line would be triggered. If I wanted to re-trigger the track 2 record buffer, I would just have to hit track 2, press play. Right? And then we can go back by hitting fill. Back again. And I have it set so that it's quantizing per 4 bars. So in that case, they both behave in the same way. Whether I'm hitting fill, it'll wait until the end of the pattern, or if I'm hitting track play, it's only going to start on the beginning of the next go around. So that was like a really fun way to use my record buffers. Oh, and the other thing I should say is all of these share the same exact part. These are all on part 1. Because I knew that I didn't want to keep too much structural information in these patterns. I feel like I get confused when that happens, and it turns into this thing where I don't really remember what each one is doing. So in this case, every pattern is just a new set of rhythms, a new melody, new chord progression. It's not the next step of that particular pattern. Although I could totally imagine doing like 1 or 2 at a time. That might help. But at the moment, I find it much more fulfilling to use this to create kind of like information, structural information, you know? It's just more hands-on for me. Still didn't really figure out a way to use the crossfader effectively, and I actually tried to use track 8 as like a crossfader trick thing, but it just got too messy because my A is set to mute the crossfader track. Any other patterns that I made on the fly would accidentally let out that track. So I ended up just scrapping that and not really messing with it. What else did I do? Yeah, I was actually thinking about things I might change. Oh, and yeah, like check this out. So even if this is playing the P-locked sample, it's not going to change when I switch to the next pattern because, again, this trig is fill triggered. So it allows me to move from one pattern to the next and set up for the next thing without disrupting the flow of the set. And that's something I really appreciate. So right now I'm on a different pattern. The only thing that's changed is the rhythm. And in fact, I could even do the same thing with the rhythm. Do I want to do that? Well, the one caveat to using fill-based P-lock trigs is that if I set up like multiple tracks that way, for example, if I set up my chord progression, then it gets a bit hairy because then when I hit fill, all of the tracks that have P-locks that are set that way will switch over. And I feel like that's not really what I want. I want to be able to transition things in smaller amounts. So I basically confined it to track 2. That way I know that whenever I'm using that fill function, the only thing that's going to change is the bass line. So in my mind, that's how I do it. That's just the hotkey for changing the bass line. And in this case, it wasn't a bass line, but one thing that I didn't do very much was just mute tracks. I kept using the knobs, and sometimes that would be inaccurate. I can see it in the recording too, because I did a stereo recording of the whole set, and it was very obvious when I'd be like, whoops, too loud. So one thing that I want to get better at is the only thing about it though is you don't really get that send reverb when you mute it. It's much more fun to do. For those of you who are not as used to my sets or my, I guess, approach to Octatrack, it's very improvisational. It's very much based on me being the brain, not the Octatrack. A lot of people call the Octatrack the brain. For me, the Octatrack is more like the instrument. And I find more pleasure in understanding certain techniques for playing the Octatrack. I find less satisfaction in moving from one pattern to the next and having that sort of determine the structure. So when I'm controlling the knobs, when I'm, recording loops and manipulating them, that's when I'm happiest. I don't do a lot of MIDI sequencing. I find it difficult for me to switch between the MIDI menu and the audio menu. So I tend to just stay on this side of things. And I get confused by parts. I rarely reload part, even though it's a pretty common technique, but I just get very confused by it. Mostly because as I'm improvising, I find new ways to adjust what I'm doing. And I find it really frustrating when I make one change and then I move to a different section and that change hasn't been reflected because it's saved to a different part. So for the most part, I try to use one part and update it as I become more experienced or as my approach to the machine changes. And that way, for example, with the set, everything's in one part. So when I save one scene, that scene now applies to every part. It's a system that works for me. It doesn't necessarily work for everyone, but the way that I kind of approach the Octatrack, which is very iterative and just kind of like slowly shaping, and it's not a perfect system. Sometimes I save over my one part, and in fact, I should probably be backing it up to part 4 every once in a while. But I experience times when I accidentally save over things, or I forget that there was something cool going on. But for the most part, I like to work with a single part. And the other thing that's kind of sticking out to me about my set yesterday is that I didn't really like having my rhythms confined to patterns. I found that my interest in changing the rhythm was a bit more flexible than that. Oh, Evan's Universe, you have a question, is that right? Did you raise your hand, Evan? Oh, hi. Welcome. So yeah, basically, one thing I noticed about my set yesterday was that I didn't really like having my rhythms confined to each pattern. I found myself wanting to change the rhythm but not change the pattern because I knew that melodies would change, different things would shift. So it becomes this thing where really what I'm doing when I change my patterns is change one thing. It's almost like every change is just a single modification to the set. And that feels a bit more comfortable, even though it's a bit kind of counterintuitive. I honestly think there might be something to that, and there are ways that I can build on that as well. I'm just gonna do it, and then I'll show you what I mean. So basically, at the moment I have P-locked rhythms on track 4. Track 4 is my rhythm track. Welcome everyone, Luke, Eric, Rustic, Daniel. It's a decent showing today. Thank you for dropping in. Just sort of reviewing my first live set since quarantine ended. and just kind of debriefing about some of the. Well, first of all, I'm gonna hold some space to say that people really had a good time, and I felt really good about that, and it made me happy to hear some of the feedback I was getting. I was told that the woman serving drinks tried to Shazam my set a few times, and then somebody had to be like, it's not actually, it's just all like improvised. So that was pretty sick. And I got a lot of really good feedback from people. I kind of had the early slot, but I kind of preferred that because I didn't really want the pressure of like having to put out like in a high energy environment where everyone's dancing. I was just a little stressed out by that idea. And honestly, the things I prepared weren't really meant for that anyway, so it worked out. So what I ended up doing was looping things on tracks 1 and 2, and also looping things in my 4-track recorder, which was super fun. Because I have up to 4 tracks there, and I was able to kind of like mute different sections as I needed them. I can play some of what that is. Let me see. Let me see if this works. Yeah, so this loop is from last night. But one thing that I was sort of mulling over was that there's a bit too much chaos involved, where one thing I wrote down, like that was one of my emotional responses, was that like I can't tell what's going to happen next. I didn't memorize what these rhythms are, and at the moment each one is its own rhythm and like chord progression. So like if I go to, so at the end of this pattern it'll go to pattern 5, and I would just be thrown into a new chord progression. Yeah, which in this case kind of worked out, but doesn't always. Most of the chords that you're hearing are pre-recorded loops that I had prepared. So as I was describing, I have tracks 3 and 4 with P-locked samples in the, this is how I get around having only one part. Most of the time when you have multiple parts, you would save your part assignment, your record sample assignment, to a different file. In my case, it's a little confusing because the assigned file here is almost never what I'm playing. I have it p-locked to the sample that I want. So in tracks 3 and 4, I would assign a new one to every pattern. This allowed me to save one part so that whenever I made a new effect, it would carry over between patterns. But I would be able to keep those loops. I do try to stay in the same-ish key, but this time around, that was an afterthought. Occasionally it would work out, and maybe I was subconsciously doing that, but I didn't really set out to make it all the same key. And you can kind of tell in some of them, not all of them. Hold on. Yeah, like this one, for example. Actually. Yeah, again, it was like... Hold on. Yeah, so basically, track 3 was all melodies that I had recorded over the last year. And I kind of wanted to do that just as sort of like a personal retrospective of the samples that I've kind of been playing through my live streams. But because of that, they were not necessarily designed to work together. And sometimes I just picked them because I liked the way they sounded. And that created situations where, one pattern to the next was not in the same key. Like this. And then I would also pre-record the bass rhythm, the kick. Which, isn't really, for me, isn't like that challenging. Like, I could just listen to it, And this, I actually did this live a couple times where I'd be like, bum, da, ba-bum. And that's not really that good. Yeah, that's what it's supposed to be. So that created some situations where I was kind of like, I didn't really like that transition. One way I could get around that is, like you say, to sort of make the whole thing in one key. Based on the nature of how I'm doing these sets, which is largely based on looping, I don't necessarily know if that would work out 100%, because sometimes when I'm making loops, I'll like sort of play with what the key sounds like it's going to be, but then I'll make a new thing. But that doesn't mean that I can't build around a particular key to start, and then I think that might help things be a bit more cohesive. So I think honestly, I think you're right. I think it would be beneficial to do that, just to like prepare the set in a key, and then if it strays from it, fine, but at least there's some kind of general foundation, because I didn't really guide it that way. But if I set my original set in one key, I think that would be good. I'm taking some notes. The other thing that I kind of felt, sorry, let me just wrap this up real quick. So I was saying earlier that I didn't really like that the rhythms would change based on each pattern, because it felt a little jarring. Like, for example, from the last rhythm to this, it was like there was almost too much of a cost to go from one pattern to another, because it felt like I was like suddenly being thrust into this other world. But I guess I'm just wondering if I could potentially just not use my patterns to trigger new rhythms, and instead just make them all assigned to whatever they're assigned to, which is a single rhythm. Because I have some experience in the last year switching samples myself, and all that really takes is some file management. You could set up a folder. You could either number the files in the order that you would like to trigger them, kind of like you would in a DJ set. Yes, the mute does cut the verb. Whereas the rhythm, the volume will actually. And so if I set it up this way, where the rhythm is not being triggered by the patterns, then the only thing that's actually changing from track to track is track 3. And track 3 in my mind is kind of like the chord progression soul of the track, which is not really that complicated. I mean, if you listen to what these things are, like that's one note. And then this one's like this kind of weird echoey thing. Right. And that way, changing patterns is really just a matter of changing this melody. If I don't want to change that melody, then I won't change it. But in my mind, I'll be like ready to change this melody, switch over to the next one. And that way this can stay the same, right? And so to sort of like continue talking out this modification to my set, each pattern would essentially just be a new melodic idea. If I wanted to add my bass line, I could trigger the fill, which is p-locked to a bass line that I record that works with this melody. Fill triggered. And then when I want to change my rhythms, I go into the change the rhythm again. Is it going to change? So now that I've muted track 3, I can move to another pattern. Mute the kick. Maybe save this track so that when I move over. Oh, and this one was not set to fill, was it? Yeah, it wasn't. So it actually ended up triggering right when I changed it. So, you know, there's some work to be done. Like the building blocks of this set. Sorry. Right. So the building blocks of this set are each pattern contains a new melody, a hidden bass line that's set to fill. So when I do want to switch it, I can move to a new pattern, change the melody by doing that, and then when I want the bass line to come in, I turn on the fill, and it'll trigger. Most of the set is designed to trigger samples once in the form of loops. And that way, they'll just play indefinitely, and then I can move around. This one doesn't happen to work very well because I'm playing a sample from last night that I don't know what pattern it was based on. But it does work with track 3 here. So, you know, even if it is messy, I know that I have these two things that can work off of each other. This rhythm, on the other hand, doesn't quite work. But if I was to do that, I would sort of be like, okay, what can I do instead that does work with this? Let's see if this works. Yeah, it's all right. And now I'm going to pick a different hi-hat thing. So again, I guess like the main design philosophy behind all of this is that like each command introduces one element. Right, so I'll record that now. Oh shit, it's set to not, yeah, hold on. So now that's in there, I could either trigger it with one of these, or I could just go like this. And since it's snapping to 64 steps, it'll play on the beginning. With all of its effects and all that. And I like this about the system because when I move from one pattern to the next, one of the biggest headaches for me is I switch from one pattern to the next and then like I don't know what the hell's going on because there's all these other triggers that are now playing that are doing things that I didn't anticipate. So I can't really move from one pattern to the next with confidence. But in this case, there's very few trigs in each pattern. There's one to make sure that my through machine is on. There's some rhythm stuff, so, you know, I might have to be wary of that when I'm transitioning from one pattern to the next. There's a kick pattern that's usually pre-saved based on the rhythm in here, which, again, I might remove altogether because I just took out all of my P-locked rhythms for each pattern. Track 5 I can kind of just throw in whenever I want. It's just like bird sounds and shit, so. Frog sounds in this case. I could actually record this under the bass line here, because I'm recording to the record buffer, always. And that can be triggered by going like this. kind of a non-traditional way to use triggers. You can switch back with the fill button. And then we can like go to another rhythm here. Let's try something weird. And now that right, so I moved to pattern 10. The only thing that changed was this melody in the background. And then once I want other things to change this to the fill. Now we're in pattern 10, but we did it gradually, right? Like I switched over, changed the bass line, changed the rhythm, slowly moved things around. I could even bring back that art from before. And what's kind of nice about that actually is starting to have all kinds of ideas now. Is that because it's recorded to a second record buffer, I can kind of assign it to anything. You know, I could assign it to track 8. It'd be kind of weird because I'd play it, but then I wouldn't be able to control it because I don't have the knobs. Anyway. I kind of want to play with, if y'all will bear with me. I should also mention that I like adding loops to static machines because static machines don't take up the RAM of your project. Your project has a limit to the amount of space that the RAM can access. And so far, I haven't really, the way that I use samples is not super intensive, so I don't find that I need to put them in the flex machine section all that much. I haven't really noticed any big differences. And as I'm saying that, I'm realizing that I actually put a lot of stuff in my flex machines. But why don't we set up a new section of like higher energy stuff in from 60 onward? Just to see how it works. And just kind of up the speed a little bit. Because for the most part, not that much changes. thing I wish I had was some kind of hi-hat stuff, and I just don't really have the tracks for that, unfortunately. There's just too much that I control that I can't really put anything in track 7 or 8 that I wouldn't want to filter. Yeah, okay. I'm gonna add a bunch of breakbeats. Actually, let's add some Motor City stuff. This is all just samples I sorted and named myself. I'm trying to stay away from swung stuff. Some breakbeats in here. Oh, that one's sick. And I'm gonna run out of space, which this is where I usually go. I need a new, honestly, out of memory. Shit. Oh, I hate that. Okay. So what we're gonna do is, this is usually where I start a new project because I'm like, damn it. But let's not do that. I'll probably make a new project out of it. I'll like save a new one and then just do the audio pool over again. But for the time being, the reason that I set this up this way is because I want to play with slices in a way that's similar to how I have shown y'all in the past. I'm gonna take out these, damn, there really is no memory left, huh? Yeah, it's just all of these loops. Shit. Well, let's just go to static machines then. I'm just gonna be messy with this today, so that basically just saving, and you know what's, yeah, so what I'm thinking about right now is that I have loops on here that I might not like, but that doesn't mean I should take them off my memory card. It just means that I think I need to use my audio pool to select the ones that I want. That way I can put them in order I want. I don't have to worry as much about naming them in a particular order. Because in the past, I've done this thing where I would just function right and left, and that allows me to switch what file is assigned to it. But I don't necessarily want to do that in this case because I feel like there's just too much messiness with that. Like, you could just end up with a file you don't really like. So it's better to just have a set that you can move down through, which is similar to just going through your patterns. So. So the reason that I've set it up this way is to show you some of the tricks that I've talked about a lot this past year. One of my favorite tricks that I sort of stumbled upon is this slicing trick, which allows me to pick the start point of these slices using an LFO. Rather than using trigs and being like, this one is slice 1, this one's slice 2. Yeah. So essentially, if we watch this. I'm trying to make it move. Oh yeah, because I have to set this to 17. Oh, slices off. Oops. Yeah, so this is obviously too fast, right? Because we're watching it just jump around. The thing is, it's a pretty long sample, actually. And this is where it gets to be a bit tricky because you can't really... 3, 2, 3, 4, 4, 2, 3, 4. It's 8 bars. And I believe... Okay, we're gonna hunt for this for a second. I have a... I have a set of breakbeats that are all the same length, and I think that's really what I'm looking for here. Like, I don't think that's it. Vintage breaks, is that it? Yeah, I think this is it. Hold on. 2, 3, 4. Okay. Check this one out. 2, 3, 4. That's 2 bars, and this is 8 bars. Too slow. I honestly don't think that's the one. White label? Yeah, actually, you know what? I'm pretty sure this is it. This used to be like my go-to for breakbeats. So let's see. So we're gonna go this one, this one, this one. Actually, yeah, so this is not how I do it because this is like number 3, this is like number 4. I have to copy it down and then press it to the next one. Okay, let's check this out. Two bars. Next one. 2 bars. Two bars. Two bars. So the reason I'm doing this is because I want to slice each one the same way. And I don't know if I've already saved this. I feel like I should have. Cool. Okay. So why did I go through all that trouble? Many of you may have already seen this, but I can set my speed of my LFO to a different speed. And suddenly I get like different breaks. For some reason it likes playing the last one, so we're gonna have to get it out of there. Okay, before I move on, quick overview. I've sliced it into 16 slices. My start point is 9. My LFO depth is 16. The speed is set up so that I'm actually triggering these samples slice by slice as it goes through the track. At the speed that the LFO is going, it's triggering those slices at the same time that the track would actually play that part of the sample. But, god damn it, why isn't it working? 16. Maybe I have to set it to 8. There it is. Right. So now, well, if I set it to something like 16, I'm only going to get a certain condensed amount of patterns, so I have to make it a little bit less, a little bit in between multiples of 4. Essentially, I'm creating infinite variations. When it comes to breakbeats, the best thing to do is keep the first bar uninterrupted. Because the LFO will only trigger every time a new slice is played, or a new trigger is played, I can keep the first bar clean and then add new elements. This is just regular, right? And then I move the slider. I can speed it up even more. And then suddenly I have, infinite variations. What I was going to do with this particular technique was set up a bunch of rhythms that work with that. So let's go through and just slice these the same way. And actually, when I'm looking back on my old sets, I used to do this thing where I would have... I just don't have enough tracks. That makes me sad. I would have like this crazy rhythm thing. I would have track 3 and 4 were... Okay, track 3 and 4 were basically both rhythm. Track 3 was like a rhythm chain. Instead of being something that I assigned to every pattern, it was its own rhythm thing. It was actually a drum chain. So I could manipulate it whenever I wanted. And it was a little bit uneventful at times because I was actually just adding a snare or hi-hats most of the time. But it was still fun. Like I would usually use the Lin drum, I want to say, and it's not enough room. So let's delete something. Yeah, so I'd have like 909, and then I'd have like Lin, I want to say. But I'm going to delete something else just so I can load it. Okay. And I would have slice on. I would set it default to 9, and I would do shit like... Right, so I have this thing. And I can switch it over. Yeah, that's a little more attractive. And then I could set, stuff to clap. This was like a pretty common thing that I would do. And since we're doing breakbeats, This is just a very different kind of set from what I was playing yesterday. I wasn't gonna do. Yeah, and then oh shit. Okay, hold on. Let's move into a new section here. Hey, meta dat. You can also that's pretty sick. I said I wasn't gonna do MIDI stuff, but kind of can't resist. And this is just like so much more interactive than, so like I want every other Oh, Peter, that's right. Good to see you. And then sometimes I would just take the rhythm out, hi-hats all out. Yeah, this one happens to be fairly clean. Yeah, if I focus on... Right, so this LFO is playing the regular speed, but then second bar will always... Oh, that one's really cool. Into that. So let's try it a different rhythm. It gets... So like higher energy, I think I would just need to prepare some more things there because I like these breakbeats, but I just took out my third sample track, which is normally for looping stuff, but in this case it's become mostly for adding to the rhythm. But when things are higher energy, I think it's a worthy sacrifice. I can still have bass lines saved in the background of this. I do like the idea of having a bass station, but I also don't like the idea of bringing, more shit. So it's a trade-off. Like the OP1's very mobile, doesn't need to be plugged in. Right now I'm having some issues charging it, which is kind of sad. I think I might need to send it in. But I think having the rhythm in track 3 helps me a little bit, and also having the 4-track is something that I should really focus on because it gives me plenty of space to play. The only thing it can't do is if I forget and I sample something, then I sample the whole 4-track that's playing in the background, which is unfortunate, but I think that's more of a mental game of remembering that. Yo. Just small modifications for a dancier set. Check this out too. The problem is the bass line is in there too. Let's set up the fourth track as the through track for that. That way I can actually add effects to it. Cool. Maybe I do need to bring the bass station next time. God damn it. What's cool about this too is there's a looper on here. What else do I want to play with? Maybe the Aphex Twin thing on here. Alright, before I go, I'm gonna fuck with this Aphex Twin patch on here that was added to the bass station recently. Haven't touched it in a while, but... try this. Oh, I forgot I'm like triggering stuff on here. Oops. This is why I don't use the MIDI menu. Not the most attractive thing ever. So I should say the patch was designed by Aphex Twin, so basically what ends up happening is that every note on this is a preset. And as you play it, like so if I hit this, I can adjust it myself. Right? But it only changes the parameters on that particular note. So it's kind of like a drum synth. So if I create like an ARP that only uses those three, it's not like perfectly synced, I think, but I can change it as it's playing. So now it's like changing over time, and I can add some stuff to it. Turn down the reverb on that. right? All it needs is a bass line, I think. Yes, that's the technical terms. Cool sounds. Anyway, okay, well that's pretty much all I have for today. went through a lot of things. I started out talking about my set, and then I kind of derailed. But generally speaking, I had a great set yesterday. It was a little more high energy than I expected because I've been inside all the time. I didn't really anticipate that people would be wanting to move, which they did. It didn't necessarily ruin things. It just meant that I had a bit more improvising to do, which I did, and people liked it. But knowing that, I would have prepared a different set of rhythms and maybe played around a little bit more with triggering slices. And kind of one of the bigger takeaways for me is to ensure that when I'm using these patterns, I'm not using them to create things that I have to remember in order to use effectively. More so incremental changes. Where, for example, if I'm using the pattern only to trigger one of the tracks and then I use other commands to trigger other things, it really gets into the kind of territory that like only people who are playing with the Octatrack actively may understand. But honestly, I think it's the most effective way, at least, to use it as an instrument. For example, in this case, I have this fill section. I have this trigger set to fill, which means that when I move from one pattern to the next, this is not actually playing until I tell it to play the fill assigned samples. Right, so if I go like that, suddenly it's playing it. And I have to play it again if the release is slow. But it's on a loop at that point. And most of the time I'm actually triggering these like this. That way, if I want to play what's actually assigned to it, I use a different hotkey. So I can go between those two. It's really just a matter of practicing that and knowing what's hidden in the project for me to use, rather than stumbling into it from one section to another. That's all for today. Thank you again for dropping in and saying hi, for listening. Let me know if this camera angle works for you. I know that like half of the screen is actually blurry, but I've received some suggestions to make this screen a little bit clearer, because for the people who are watching who want to know what I'm actually doing on the Octatrack, it's a bit clearer, but I know that that comes at a cost of seeing everything else clearly. So let me know if you think that's a good idea, or if I should return to the old ways. Thanks again for dropping in. I'm peacing out. See you, everybody. Bye, Peter.